Stephen wrote that play show, so here's hoping that I can bring that all together. You're probably wondering where he went to. He's actually gone down to Sunday school to talk to the Sunday school about the meaning of baptism and the meaning of that sacrament. In part because of the sermon that I told a few months back about me offering communion at 13 to my Sunday school class. The Sunday school thought it would be a great opportunity for him to come down to talk to all of them about that. So recently, I met two people who I would say were in the depths of despair. One person I met by chance. I sat down beside him. We were having coffee, waiting for his number to be called, and we started a conversation. He was an older gentleman with a cane, and his illness was overtaking his body. And we talked about what he was experiencing. He said that I'm a bum. He said, I've made $5,000 this year, that's it, gross. I said, so how are your family? Do you have any support? He said, my family might as well be 1,000,000 miles away. And so we talked some more. And in that he talked about the fact that he was dealing with, at an elderly age, issues of abuse that happened to him way back that he never thought he would have to ever deal with. He was in the depths of despair. All I could do at that time in that place, because I may never see this person again, was to touch him on the arm and to say, you are a child of God, and the next time you think to say that you are a bum, maybe you could start it with, I am not up. And maybe you can live into that life. The second person I met recently was a grieving person. And we met and we had coffee and we talked. And we talked all around about our experiences in the last year. And then finally, partway through the visit, I said, so we're talking around everything, but I want to know, how are you? And that person's eyes exploded. Her hands went to her face, and she started sobbing. And my instant reaction, I don't know what was with this, but I went onto my knees, and I grabbed her hand, and I just held it, and we sat together as she sobbed. And then she started to get control of herself, and then I thought to myself, I'm on my knees. How did that happen? Okay, I'm going to get back up onto my chair now as we're getting composure, and sat with her, and we cried some more, and we got through the conversation and the visit. But those two people have stayed with me this week. And my reaction to them has stayed with me this week. The church calendar. Okay, let's see if this is going to work. Let's get this up and going.
press the standby button. It's the mute. It says mute on it. There you go.
Krista, you are awesome. There's a reason why I really want this up here. This is our church calendar. This is our year. Today is the reign of Christ. It's a really pretty circle. It describes the seasons of our year, and the more I meet with people, the more I realize that this isn't quite common knowledge. We're at the very top, that little strip of white that goes right up towards the end. It's called Reign of Christ, and we're coming into the season of Advent, where we have Christmas and the baptism of Jesus, and then there's a season of a number of weeks after Epiphany, where we come into Transfiguration Sunday. And then most of you know about Ash Wednesday and then the season of Lent. And then we come into Holy Week just before, which is a lot of work, just before Easter Sunday. And then we have this season of Easter that takes us to Pentecost and Trinity Sunday. And then we've got this big chunk of green here. And we had 28 weeks of seasons of Pentecost this year, just in case you didn't know. We decided in the United Church to add a season of creation, just smack in the middle of it, to break it up and to honor our world and honor our earth. And then we come up through, again, to the Reign of Christ Sunday. Why do I talk to you about the calendar? Well, in many traditions, we follow something called the lectionary. And you hear that word thrown out around. The lectionary readings for today are. Well, we usually have a three-year cycle that we follow. Year A, B, and C. We're just finishing up the third year, year C. And when presented with these lectionary readings, we have a First Testament reading, usually a psalm, and then normally a gospel reading to choose from. And then if you want to throw something in, you can usually throw in some type of contemporary reading like we had with the Anne Weems poem today. So as ministers, we're offered these, and we're offered a selection of resources. And this week, they had the Luke reading, the Luke 23 reading, the Christ crucifixion moment. And the note underneath of it said, just in case you don't want to do this, just on the cusp of Advent, if you're not ready to go there, here's one. Here's another one. It's at the beginning of Luke. And it's here, and Zechariah is in the temple, and he's just been presented with John the Baptist after 8 days, and this infant is here, and he proclaims a song. And he rejoices in God, and he talks about the Christ coming, and forgiveness, and the tender mercies, and the rising sun for those living in darkness. He talks about our guide coming to be the feet on a path of peace. This baby image. But then we have this Luke 23, which is the image of the skull, the place on the cross, Jesus there with criminals, his prayer of forgiveness. Their derision and their mocking of him to save himself. And these criminals who say, no, stop. This one criminal rebukes them and says, stop. And then he petitions Jesus, remember me. And then Jesus says, truly, I tell you, today, you will be with me in paradise. So, I was proposing that I have a selection here to choose from. And one of the things we're taught in school is when something bothers you, go with it. Enter into that space. And I thought, how can we have these two contrasting images of Jesus sitting side by side on the same day under the Reign of Christ Sunday? How do we deal with this image of Jesus as the coming infant with our infant baptism and Jesus on the cross? And what can both of these images say about Reign of Christ? have the image of the baby. Like today, it evokes this intense emotional response in us. This Christ. And then we have this image. Christ. Again. Same person. We have this image of this baby. Christ. And then we have this image of Christ. Again. And again. So I ask you, if you were to compare them and think about these two images, what might they have in common for us? My first year of school, I took Worship Foundations from Charles Pate, a father, a Catholic father. And it was in this class that a vision of Christ erupted for me. A vision of Christ and God as the vulnerable one. And I would contend that these two images that we see of Christ share in common vulnerability. This embodiment, if we believe in Jesus as God come to earth, the breaking in of Christ, of God in the Christ, this wisdom on the cross at that moment, Jesus shows us a different way of being, a way of peace, not by brute force, but through self-sacrifice. Incredibly difficult images. Different images of earthly concepts, away from our reign of Christ of power and strength, but a different type of strength. When dying, he prays on behalf of his torturers and persecutors. This divine vulnerability comes into the world as a helpless infant that we cannot help but respond to. Holding these images together, these two images of the same person who erupts into our life at the same time, brought me to some thoughts. I went this week to a lecture. It was called Grief Taboos, and it was offered by CDHA, the Capital Health District Health Authority. And it was a really useful lecture after what I had experienced. It talked about tears, especially with regard to bereavement. Tears, he said, shows a vulnerability. It prevents us from seeing, so our eyes get blurry. It's an instinctive response to an overwhelming emotion. It causes us as people to step back and soften. We can't fight when we cry. And it elicits altruistic behaviors in others. A response to grief. When I was on my knees, all of a sudden I had no idea how I was there. It was instinctual, without thought. It pulls strongly at us. It's this relationship to perceive helplessness. But the person who is crying, funny enough, what you think might be weakness is actually a strength. Our infants, they cry because they are signaling to us a need for appeasement, and they want attachment. It's beautiful in that it solicits bystanders to express sympathy and aid. It expresses my need to touch that man's arm this past while. It also helps me understand why we have Christmas and Easter believers. Why people who won't come to church for the rest of the year just can't stay away from those times. It's, I think, when Jesus and the Christ come divinely into our midst, most piercingly into our human condition, so that we might feel understood. I'm driving, as some of you know, back and forth to Kentville, and so I'm reading books, and my 8th book that I'm on is The Presence, or Realizing the Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Probably some of you have read that. He talks about this portal of allowing. This moment, he says, where you surrender. He says for Christians, it's like a moment on the cross when you say, okay, thy will be done, not mine. Complete surrender. What seems like an obstacle to peace, actually allowing that cross moment becomes a situation for the divine to break through. It can be used for any situation that looks bad in our lives. So the next time you're irritated with somebody and they're being vulnerable, and it's easy to talk about the weather, or maybe strike out of irritation, I think Jesus gives us a different way of being strong. So instead of discouraging somebody, say, I know you have the strength to make it through. And your vulnerability is a beautiful strength. Our King is the King in the lowlands, because God does not want us to die and suffer in that dark and sad region. So maybe somebody you know today is in that darkness, but you have the ability and the capacity of God within you, that Holy One in us, like that thief on the cross, with his astonishing request that raises the question of how we can discern the nature of God in our midst, how we recognize the presence of God in these moments, evoking a world of meaning, a world of hope. The experience of that thief recognizes that potential for salvation that intrudes into a seemingly hopeless life. This fracture of time, not time that we talk about here behind me, not the time of Jesus' day, but today. That fracture of images here at the end of the Christian year. We might see ourselves in the reign of Christ already, and see a faint light rising from the dawning of this realm coming into Advent. A place as calm and as refreshing as a garden called paradise.